Okay. Um, Good morning, everybody. It's possible you not knowing what the court's decision is, so I'll just make that statement. The court's decision is that the scheme of arrangement has been approved. The scheme of arrangement has been so sorry to tell you. One can't help wondering, one can't help what the consequences of this are going to be. So many potential unintended consequences off the back of it. Um, Statisticians talk about wild variables. We have a very new wild variable, which is that investors and, in fact, purchasers of any financial services product regulated in the UK that has previously been protected by FOS and FSCS, they no longer have that certainty. And absolutely nobody knows what that is going to lead to. Could it lead to people thinking, nah, too many scandals around. If I can't be sure that if this firm goes under, I'm going to get my money back, why bother? Why don't I go into a buy-to-let property, for argument's sake? Could it mean that people who are going to invest in some kind of investment vehicle, could they say to themselves, well, why do this through a firm? Why don't I get exactly the same kind of financial product through Frankfurt or Stuttgart or Madrid, where the deposit guarantee scheme, which is technically what our financial compensation scheme is, these other jurisdictions where those statutory rights or protected rights still exist. But to be very frank with you, the most immediate thought is, are there Woodford investors out there who, because of publicity, actually still think they're going to get 77p in the pound in their losses, because that's the narrative that was played out in the media, and we tried explaining that to the judge as best as we could. Are there people who are going to get their compensation checks and think, well, why am I getting X? I was expecting Y. TTF has put out a press statement, which I'll refer to shortly. I'll put a link in the chat to where the court decision can be accessed in case you want to see it. And I'll put a link to the TTF press statement as well. But what I'd like to do first of all is invite any member of what was the Woodford 10 that became the Woodford Warriors to share their thoughts. Now, folks, we are recording this session. There'll be Woodford investors who won't be able to get to today's meeting at 11 or the one at 3 o'clock or the one at 6, but they might, for example, want to watch one or more of them over the weekend. So we'll be doing as quicker editing process as possible. So bear in mind it's being recorded. As always, only say what you know you're comfortable to be out there in the big bad world, because we'll put it on social media and so on. So only say things you're not going to wish you hadn't said. But can I go to Mr. Alan Pyatt first? Alan's very quick off the mark with these sorts of things.
Right. Well, I'm about to write something on our Facebook site. Yeah, it's a long judgment. And again, it's lots of words to try and assimilate. I think we gave it our best shot. And I think, what we tried to fight it on was the FOS and the FCS. But, I kept quite quiet. But, what I'm writing here is, only 34,000 individuals actually voted. And he doesn't stipulate that. He talks about, 93.7% said yes. But as I said in court, 16,000 of those people that voted had no say. Their DFMs voted for them as individual investors. So we've got, what looks like 34,000 people giving a yes vote, which has now got an SOA that's been approved. And it's going to affect between 250 to 450, maybe 500,000 people. but 34,000 people. So I don't understand where the justice is there. And then if you consider, and some people may not know the detail of this, it was said in court that the explanatory letter, which was put out, well, was downloaded by only 8,992 individuals or people. So out of 50,000 votes, less than 9,000 people actually looked at the explanatory note. So how well informed they were, I don't know. And it'd be interesting how it goes. I mean, I don't know, Andy, are you talking about whether or not there's been a discussion now with you and Hock, etc., about yes, it's a dead dog, you know, it's not worth going to Court of Appeal because, you know, we've given it our shot now and it hasn't landed, or is that a discussion you're still yet to have?
It's a discussion we are actively having. I'll give you the bottom line. So long as the court grants us protection from costs, we want the conversations we've are that there doesn't really seem to be anything in the decision that fully explains why the central argument that we put forward, which is that you guys had rights when you bought the product, you did so on the basis that it meant what it said on the tin. You know, if it doesn't work out, there's the FOS, there's the FSCS. We fundamentally are still of the view that the rights that FSMA 2000 provides are real and important and protected. There's nothing in the judgment that actually helps us understand why the judge doesn't see it that way. So I'm about to put in the chat, folks, the TTF press statement, which basically says we're looking at an appeal, and our view is that so long as the court gives us a chance to appeal and protects our downside from costs, we will. And why wouldn't we? This is, as I believe the other side's barrister said, this is a matter of national interest. I'm just going to find the TTF document.
Okay. Well, while you're doing that, Andy, I mean, there's also the fact that this doesn't stop people going after other entities that aren't Link. So they could go to FOS on against WIM, yeah, Woodford Investment Management, or we've got Harkers Parker that may continue down a route with people like Hargreaves Lansdowne.
Yeah.
So there are still routes for people to go. It's whether or not, you know, they wish to go down that route, because it's been a long journey already. Yeah, with putting lots of effort in, etc. And is it a time to say, okay, is it time to give up or not? I don't know. I'm in two minds at the moment myself. So I'll hand the mic over to others now.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you very much indeed. So, cheers, Alan. You got the ball rolling really nicely, actually. And I hope you will understand that today's meeting, particularly this one, all kind of, you know, it's on the fly. There's no structure to this. We're just going to go with whatever the energy is, folks. Okay. But I put in the link. I put the link in the chat to the court judgment. If you want to kind of cut to the chase, go to the back end of it, which is where the judge basically says, essentially, he says, I see no reason to not approve the scheme. He makes reference to the kind of the overwhelmingly positive vote, which feels a bit awkward to me. I'm not criticising the judge, obviously, but we all know that in actual fact, only a very small percentage of the people who are impacted actually voted. And then there's a question, how many of those who did vote actually really understood what was really meant by 77p in the pound? I've also put in the chat TTS press statement, which, as you can see, is pretty critical of the FCA. No surprises there, folks. We'll come back to the FCA later. Mr. Will Thurston, would you be happy to chip in? Because I think that Ian's got a techie glitch, and after Will, we'll go to Deborah. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I haven't had a chance to kind of review the full details, so I don't have anything to add. And I don't want to take us down another rat hole, but as a lead day participant, I'm feeling pretty frustrated about their 30%, but that probably needs to be a side issue. I mean, they are saying they're declaring it a win, and I'm thinking, well, says who, and why would they be entitled to their 30%? But like I say, I think that's a side issue for those who are signed up with lead day. But nothing else to add, Andy.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Have if you're allowed to say, and I'm not encouraging you to say anything you shouldn't say, privilege and all that stuff. Does anybody know if Link has put anything out in terms of a statement today? Sorry, not Link. I mean lead day.
Well, I can say they haven't, because that's not giving anything away. So I haven't received anything today. No.
No, I suspect we'll
Okay.
get it end of play today, and it'll just be this is the verdict, and then they might follow up next week with something.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Will. Thank you very much. I'm just so sorry there's not better news today. I really, really am. At one point, I felt very confident that the judge kind of fully understood's not the right word. I'm not suggesting that the judge didn't understand, but fully sympathised with the idea that 77p in the pound bit might have had a bit of an impact on the vote, and the idea that the FSMA, the Financial Services Markets Act 2000 rights were real rights. Deborah.
Yeah, sorry, Andy. I mean, I said I wasn't going to say anything, but I mean, having sat through the court hearing in person for 2 days, you're right. There were some moments where the judge really did get it, and I remember thinking, "Gosh, we've landed, a couple of killer blows here." So I am frustrated, because I did think there was some stuff going well in our favour.
Thank you, Will. Just before we go to Deborah for her comment, John Oldfield, thank you, John, has just put a very interesting point in the chat. He says, looking at the judgment, the judge appears to be outsourcing his decision to the voting that happened. I was chatting to somebody the other day, and this speaks to a point that I think it was Anthony Etkin made a long time ago. Apparently, almost all scheme of arrangements are approved, and given the massive vote in favour of it, that would have weighed very, very heavily. So, John, I think you might be right. I think he's kind of saying, well, if you guys didn't want it, then you wouldn't have voted so overwhelmingly for it, which again takes you to this question: was anybody left with the impression that 77p in the pound meant 77p in the pound? We'll only know that really when people get their compensation checks. And if we end up with a whole load of people writing to the Daily Mail, etc., or their MP, etc., saying, why have I got when I was expecting Y? We'll only perhaps know then the extent to which people misunderstood, let me put it that way, the 77p in the pound narrative. Deborah, your thoughts, please. Thank you. You might be on mute, Deborah.
Hi, excuse me, I'm full of cold. I haven't read the the judgment, but I was in court. I think it was a long shot that this was going to go in our favour. However, having said that, I agree with Will. I think there were many things that did land with the judge, and a lot of things that weren't clear, that he wasn't clear about. So why should the rest of us be clear about it? I think one of the frustrating things is because of this scheme of arrangement that seemingly people can arrange and bypass, as you say, FOS and the FSCS. Really, that seems to me that's how they get around things. And I mean, you could have said, I just don't want anything to do with that scheme of arrangement because I think it's absolute rubbish. I'd rather go down the other the other avenue, basically because there's a vote and they go with the majority of the vote, then you're scuppered if you really don't believe in that at all. In this day and age, I think actually, could they not get the the people to say, right, if you want this scheme of arrangement, you lot go for it. And you people, if you don't want this, you go down this other avenue. But as I found in the courtroom, and as the council said, this doesn't have to be a good scheme of arrangement. It just has to be a scheme of arrangement that is basically written properly. And if people haven't read the small print and if people haven't understood it, that's their lookout, unfortunately. But to my mind, you do need a great level of expertise to actually understand the scheme of arrangement properly, which is unfortunate. And I think, as you say, there's going to be a lot of people expecting 77p in the pound. And when they get tuppence halfpenny, they'll be going, hold on a minute, what's this all about? And then it's too late. There you go. That's my tuppence halfpenny. Over and out.
Thank you, Deborah. I think you raised some very good points, as you so often do. What will happen if, in all sincerity, what will happen in all sincerity if somebody voted for the scheme on the basis that they believed it was 77p in the pound, gets the compensation check, thinks, why have they sent me the first instalment when actually it's the whole lot? What will such a person do? Remember, the judge was quite specific. Correct me if I'm wrong, folks, but if I remember rightly, the judge said that what mattered was whether Link's explanatory statement was correct. Whether there was or wasn't anybody confused by, misled by, or anybody misunderstood the FCA's 77p in the pound statement, or the media pickup on that statement from the FCA, didn't seem to be relevant. What the judge was testing was, did the explanatory statement, was it okay? And it would appear as though he thought it was, because it wasn't Link that issued the 77p in the state. It wasn't Link that issued the 77p in the pound statement. It was the FCA, and the judge wasn't opining on the FCA's bit. That's almost like a different matter. Thank you very much, Deborah. Thank you very much indeed, folks. Please do have a look at the points we put in our press statement. I'll put a link. I'll put the links in again because some of you have only just joined and you won't be able to get to the links if you've only just joined. So I'll put them in again. Mr. Ian Duffield, let's have another go for you, Ian. Thank you.
Yeah, can you hear me, Andy?
Yes, we can this time. Thank
Super.
you.
As you're aware, I've been having some problems with Zoom this morning, so I'm a little bit late to the party, dare I use the word. I don't know what I missed at the beginning, but I'm assuming that I've seen your text about the scheme has been approved. I'm assuming, therefore, it's been approved with no amendments, just approved in its entirety. Okay,
that is fine. That is right.
Just a couple of observations. I joined just as Alan was speaking about whether it'd be possible to go after other people regardless of the scheme. I'm mindful of the second day of the hearing where there was a discussion about what they were terming the ricochet effect, which I understand. So I expect that any attempt to go after WIM or indeed anybody else who is protected by the so-called indemnity, and I know it's not an indemnity as such, but the effect is it prevents action against them because of this ricochet effect. So I suspect we probably can't go after anybody, including WIM, unless there's a successful appeal. I'm mindful of Deborah's comments just now, and I think the situation here in respect of the vote is that the scheme of arrangement with this is similar to a voluntary liquidation, where the same thing happens with creditors. It goes on a percentage vote, and whether you agree with it or not, all creditors are prevented then from pursuing litigation against a debtor who's covered by a voluntary liquidation. Same thing happens with the protection in the US. So that's just a couple of observations on what I've heard so far. I'm also mindful of Lee Day's position that they will treat this as a win. They will take their 30%, like it or not. And from that point of view, I suspect that they're then out of the frame because it appears that they can't get anybody to cover them for the legal costs. The issue then is, regardless of what happens with the appeal, or if the appeal is successful, then that's great. But if the appeal is not successful, it seems to me that the only way then is to persuade the government or the FCA to not override or ignore the High Court judgment, because they can't. But I'm also mindful that what they did in the respect of the post office scandal was they introduced some additional legislation, which meant that gave a separate recourse to those people who've been convicted without having to go through the normal situation of appealing against a wrongful conviction. So I suppose there's a possibility of that. And in respect to the 77p in the pound, the thing that really annoys me about this is, if you look at that statement, what it's doing is it's including the reimbursements that were made, the 5 reimbursements that were made during the last 4 years. Now, my position on that, or my view on that, is that firstly, that's not a function of the scheme of arrangement. That had already happened. And even if this scheme of arrangement was voted out, nobody would be asking for that money back, that reimbursement back, because to me, that wasn't a compensation for losses, because it wasn't a loss. That was money still in the fund. So the 50 odd pence in the pound that I got from that was my money. It was my money that was captive in the fund, was still there, and been held hostage for 4 years. So that is where the really disgraceful part about this argument of 77p in the pound is, because that 50 odd p has got nothing to do with the scheme of arrangement. It was my money all along. It wasn't a loss. The loss was the remaining, in my case and Linda's case, the remaining £107,000 that wasn't covered by those reimbursements, and that was only 5 to 8p in the pound. So arguing that is probably the only way to knock a bigger hole in the 77p in the pound. Half of that, most of that money was already mine, and it wasn't a loss because it was still in the fund. So that was simply giving me my money back. Just took them 4 years to do it. So it should never have been part of that explanatory 77p in the pound. The reality is it's 5 to 9p in the pound, depending where we end up. So just my observations on the situation, sad though this situation may be.
Thank you very much indeed. We're going to go to Philip Meadowcroft next. Then I'm going to invite Graham Dickinson and Anthony Etkind, who are part of the so-called Woodford Warriors, and then to anybody else. Meanwhile, I'm going to try to find a document that we shared with the court. It's a court document, so we can share it, of course. And it's relevant because it shows the very genuine attempts that TTF made to encourage, if that's the right word, to encourage the FCA to put out a statement clarifying what the 77p in the pound really meant. You'll see the email exchange. We were very polite, we were very courteous, we were very constructive, but we were also very, very concerned that there was a chance people would misunderstand, inverted commas, what the FCA put out. I'll try to find it and I'll put it in the chat. Meanwhile, let's go to Mr. Philip Meadowcroft. Philip, thank you.
Thank you,
Andy.
Andy, sorry.
Sure.
I'm thinking of somebody else at the moment. First of all, I think everyone feels that the process that you led and drove was conducted in an exemplary fashion.
Thank you.
I think we all will probably very happily subscribe to that. What I have done is to look at the court judgment, so that there's a lot to read there. But if I could suggest that you might start at paragraph 110, which is under the heading, whether the scheme is one that an intelligent scheme creditor could approve. And in that paragraph 110, referring to arguments put forward by Harcus Parker, the judge has said, quote, "The court is not required to form a view on whether the scheme is in some general sense or in the court's opinion the fairest or the best scheme. Rather, the question is whether an intelligent and honest person acting in the respect of their interest, might reasonably approve it.
Yeah.
Sounds a little bit like, and I hope I'm not being disrespectful, something approaching dancing on the head of a pin there. The paragraphs 111, 12, and 13, which I won't read out now, I would also commend to everybody to look at, because I think this is just before the end of the document, and it focuses on much of what we've just been talking about. That is all. If my video has gone, it's because I'm looking on my screen at the court's judgment, and I don't think it can cope with both.
Yeah, thank you. We can see you well, Philip. Thank you very much. I have found the document that we shared with the court. It's the email exchange between TTF and the FCA, where we're basically asking the FCA, please make sure you put something out so that people don't think 77p in the pound means 77p in the pound. And we submitted that document to the court because of a very good point that Graham Dickinson made during the court hearing. Maybe Graham will remember that when he gave evidence. We'll go next to Anthony Etkind if Anthony's happy to speak. Excuse me, and then we'll go to Graham Dickinson. Thank you. Anthony, anything you'd like to share today?
Oh, there we go. Yeah, sorry, I missed most of what you just said. I got a call from my granddaughter in Hong Kong. So you and I have already spoken, so you know where I stand really. I don't think that there's going to be any chance of an appeal from the Harcus Parker contingent, where I'm chair of the claimant group. It's just a question of whether you can find a way of appealing without exposing yourself to costs.
Yeah.
I don't know where you are on that at the moment.
I'll come in on that then. So, by the way, folks, the reason why Anthony and I and others were able to speak about the decision prior to the day, because we were privy to the decision, but subject to a very strict embargo. But that did enable us to speak to each other about it, knowing each other knew what the decision was. So I just want to make that point in case anybody was either concerned or confused by it. We definitely want to appeal. We are still of the view, despite the court's decision, that the FSMA rights ought to trump what is essentially a company law instrument for dealing with insolvencies. We think that view's right, so we want to challenge it. We also have the view that some of the people who voted will have been influenced by the 77p in the pound point. But TTF is, skint anyway. We literally haven't got any money to even, buy the court attendees a cup of coffee, let alone pay legal costs of expensive barristers. And I think you all know that the other side has some pretty heavyweight, very expensive people on the team. Let's go to Mr. Graham Dickinson next, if Graham would like to share any thoughts he has. And I'm just about to put in the chat, Graham, that document we put, we gave the court, TTF gave the court, which includes the email exchange between us and the TT and the FCA. There are a couple of journalists here. If any of you want to pick up on that document I've just put in the chat, feel free to do so. It's a public document. Mr. Graham Dickinson, to you. Thank you.
Hi, Andy, and everybody else. Well, yeah, as with others, Andy, just to echo the thanks for the immense effort you've put in leading this campaign. The outcome isn't unexpected, but nevertheless, it is disappointing. I haven't had a chance to read the decision properly yet, so I haven't really got much comment to make on it at the moment. I haven't read this document you just put up either. Just remind me what that was about.
Yeah, this is the document. I'll share my screen and I'll show you guys. If you don't mind, Graham, I'm going to interrupt you. It's such a topical thing. I'm going to, oops, I'm going to share it, and I'm going to share it and draw your attention to a couple of key bits in it, and then that way you'll know why I'm drawing attention to it. In so many ways, it's not going to change the court's decision. But if we were given the chance to appeal, then I'm confident that the 77p in the pound issue would be part of the case, you know, because we need to help the judge to understand that, as we believe, some of the folks who voted in favour of the scheme would have done so on the basis that they thought they were getting 77p in the pound. So let me just share my screen and show you this. I think it's that. Yeah, here we go. So as you can see, it says produced for the statutory hearing of 18-19 January regarding the 77p in the pound issue. I'll tell you specifically what brought this about. When Graham was giving evidence, he made reference to, correctly, he made reference to the fact that he was aware that TTF had tried to get the FCA to clarify what the 77p in the pound meant. So this document is basically the email trail between TTF and the FCA. As it says at the top, this is an email trail, please read it from the bottom up. So I'm going to go to the bottom. And what it shows you is that on the 11th of May, we sent, and those of you who know Mark Bishop will know that Mark had a big part to play in the wording of this. And by the way, thanks for the thanks about me sort of leading the team, as it were, but it really has been a massive team effort. The Woodford 3 that became the Woodford 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 that became the Woodford Warriors, plus, of course, the absolutely phenomenal input we've had from Hock and Damien. Hock, the supposedly retired lawyer, and Damien, the rather good barrister. I genuinely can't fault in any way, shape, or form the input we've had from the team, or from Hock, or from Damien. I genuinely don't think that we have got the decision we got due to any kind of failing on our part. I really do believe that. But anyway, what this email says is, dear Ashley and Nikhil, Ashley, the chair of the FCA, Nikhil is the chief exec. Hope you're well. I'm writing to you in my capacity as TTF. I'm aware that people are being left with the impression that the redress will be in the order of 77 pence in the pound. I know that because Woodford victims who are members of the Woodford campaign group that we have that we run have explained that was their understanding. I've got some vivid memories of people coming to Zoom meetings where we talked about the 77p in the pound bit, and they said, "What do you mean it doesn't mean 77p in the pound?" You know, people were very, very genuinely of the view that 77p in the pound was what they were going to get. And we basically go on to ask, please see the recent comment in the Financial Times by Mark Bishop. It's a bit wider. TTS head of strategy, and please also this piece in Share Profits. You can organise a trial if you're not already registered users of the site. And there's loads in here about this kind of misinformation narrative. We got a reply back from David Cross, the head of external comms. Fair enough, not from Nikhil or from Ashley, but we got a reply back that basically says blah 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 blah. We're not minded to do anything. And we reply back saying, for goodness sake, please, please, please do, etc., etc. Anyway, we tried our best to get them to change their point of view, but we didn't. Now, it's purely speculation, but some people are of the view that the FCA's comms around the 77p in the pound bit was quite deliberate. Some people are of that view. Who knows? Who knows? Also, Graham Dickinson produced a rather brilliant table of press coverage, and the press picked up on the 77p in the pound narrative, and there were lots of articles that carried that message without all the kind of technical small print that would have helped people understand that 77p in the pound didn't mean 77p in the pound. Graham, back to you, because you now know the document I was referring to. Back to you, Graham.
Okay, well, I don't think I made the best of that schedule when I gave evidence in court, because I don't think I'd fully understood the implication of it myself when I put it together, because I read the articles through the prism of assuming that it was 77 pence in the pound, which was represented by the proportion of 230 million against 298 million. So in other words, it was the proportion of the FCA assessment that was the 77%. However, I did note a couple of instances where it was quite apparent there was a different 77 pence in the pound that was being discussed, and that was where the 77p, what they were saying was that if you add the 230 million quid to the amount of payouts to date, then the total would amount to 77 pence in the pound of the value of the fund on the date of closure. So that's quite a different 77%. Now, having revisited the schedule, there were quite a few references to 77p that were completely non-specific, but the first 3 or 4 I noticed when I looked back with that more investigatory question in my mind. They were different publications, but they were all on the same date. And one of those publications was quite clear that the 77 pence in the pound they were talking about then was in fact it was the 77 pence in the pound representing the proportion of the fund value at closure that would be received when you added the scheme money to the payouts that have been made to date. So I think actually that the early narrative around those dates was about that 77 pence in the pound.
Right.
But later on, we're clearly talking about 77 pence in the pound as being the proportion of 230 million against 298 million. So, I mean, the narrative has been so confusing that we're even confused about which 77p, even at the stage of having given evidence to court. And it would have been, if I'd have had that bit of insight, I could have rather wryly noted to the court, do you realise there's 2 times 77p here that we're discussing, but it's pretty hard to see which one is which when you read the press articles. I think that might have made the point better, and I'm kind of sorry I was a bit slow on the uptake there, but that's as I see it now.
Graham, thank you very much. And I really don't, I struggle to kind of put the concept of being slow on the uptake and Graham Dickinson in the same sentence. Graham, you did an absolutely phenomenal job. But by the way, I think we all know this. Graham did a great job. Alan Pike did a great job speaking. We had a superb bit from Karen. We'll always remember that. Everybody, absolutely everybody did their absolute best on this. Does anybody else want to come in with commentary? You might see, I'm putting in the chat the links to articles that that are in the table that Graham Dickinson very carefully and very professionally produced for us. And so these are the articles that led us to believe that there's reason to think that some people thought that 77p in the pound meant 77p in the pound. Please wave a hand at me, either digitally or literally, if you'd like to come in with a comment. We'd like to hear from as many people as we can. Please do. If anybody wants to come in. I've just kept, meanwhile, while you're waiting, folks, I'm just going to count putting these links in the chat. You can have a look at those. Yep. Some of these are behind the paywall, so you may or may not going to get to them yet, but at least you can have them. We have 2 other meetings today covering this space. We've got one at 3 o'clock on the same Zoom link, and we've got one at 6 p.m. And what I'm kind of half expecting is that the nature of our conversation is going to evolve during the course of the day. What I mean by that is we'll probably go from talking about what's happened in terms of the decision to what are we going to do about it. Now, on the what are we going to do about it front, we're thinking that some folks might want to write to their MPs. Some folks might want to explore what potential redress avenues are available, for example, in relation to any of the other parties, as has been mentioned by some of the good folks here. There also may be people who want to go and meet their MP and say, Mr. or Mrs. MP, I'm going to get a fraction of the compensation I would have got if I was allowed to use the FOS and FSCS the way I was meant to be able to do it according to Parliament. I'm unhappy about that. What are you going to do about it? And who knows what they might say. Mr. Ian Duffield, back to you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just before I come in, I did notice Deborah was waving at you, but you missed it, Andy. Do you want to try Deborah first and then come back to me?
Most certainly, ladies first. Sorry, Deborah. So I'm trying to do two things at once, and you know what us chaps are like, multitasking. Thanks, Deborah.
Thank you. I was just wondering, and also because Ian said that, do people work out with all the instalments? Do people get to 77p in the pound?
I think the answer is no.
Right, because Alan did my my actual maths for me because I couldn't work it out, and I think I actually do.
I do as well.
And I'm wondering whether, because I think I was also in the bracket of the average amount that people lost. I was an average person,
yes,
which was to the lower scale. I'm wondering whether they've done their maths based solely on that, rather than, I don't know how else they would work it out, but it seems to me that that might be how they've actually come about with their figures, because it's like, I don't know, has anyone seen any accounts? It's like
Can I come to that then, Deborah? So the
thanks,
the 77p in the pound is relation to the fund value when it closed on the 3rd of June 2019, which was about, it was £1 a share, then it went down to 86p straight away on the same day. So that's how they're referring it to. And it all depends on your share class as well. If you're an income share rather than accumulation share, as an income share, I doubt you'll get to 70p in the pounds, because you've been taking, they were giving you, not you, but others, income.
it's buts and maybes, isn't it? The calculations that we did, generally speaking, were significantly less than 77p in the pound, weren't they? I'm just finding this other link. Thank you, Deborah. Does that help at all, Deborah? I'm not quite sure if it does, but do you think that might help explain it?
I'm just wondering how they came to that sort of general figure, because yeah, I'm not a mathematician, so I don't know. So therefore, it wasn't clear to me, and I'd like to think I'm quite an intelligent person, but yeah, it was far too complicated for the average bear. Let's say it like that.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely sound. I remember in the court there was it took quite a while for this 77p in the pound bit to be explained, let alone kind of properly interpreted. Thank you, Deborah. I think we'll go back to Ian then. Ian, back to you, sir.
Yeah, first of all, Deborah, I was significantly less, or Linda and I was significantly less than 71p in the pound. We were something in the order of 50 odd pence in the pound. And part of the reason for that was, as Alan has rightly pointed out, we were in the income rather than the accumulation side of the fund. So to be fair, we had been receiving income as it was going, and it would have been perfectly correct and right if that had been adjusted accordingly, if this had been done properly by the FCA. And what they've done, I think, is they've just simply taken an average across the whole thing. The other thing, of course, is that at the time we were with Hargreaves Lansdown, and the income that was coming in was being reinvested automatically by Hargreaves Lansdown. So we actually had something, I think off the top of my head, I had something like 19 different purchases that had gone on over the space of 3 years or so. And of course, the price was gradually rising. So people who invested early on at the lower price may well calculate at 70 odd p in the pound. Anybody who invested later on or over a period of time would have been significantly less because the price was rising up until when it started to fall. And by then I turned off the reinvestment from Hargreaves Lansdowne. So I hope that helps explain maybe some of what you're looking at. The second thing, Andy, you will have seen the response that we got from Lucy Powell. So I'm quite happy to get back in touch with Lucy Powell, who's my MP for the benefit of everybody else. She's also the shadow leader of the House, with the results of what this has meant, because that was quite a positive response from Lucy Powell, although very, very late in the day, I'm afraid. But if you want to suggest anything we might want to do with the communication, I did open the door for you to go back to her in my reply to her, as you'll have seen. But I'm quite happy to suggest a meeting with Lucy and push that, because she did seem to be pledging support. And of course, with several 100,000 potential votes here, this is an opportunity for the shadow cabinet to try to make some impact on this. So I'm quite happy to pursue that. If I'll say if you want me to, I'm sure you do anyway, but I'll do that anyway.
Yes,
but it may be we can try to get some sort of a meeting with her. I get some sort of a meeting with her to advance the argument, firstly about the 77p in the pound. And then the next bit would be whether there is any line in pursuing some sort of judicial review with the FCA or of the SCA that may result in them being pushed into a position of agreeing to accept claims coming in, although I'm sure they'll stand on the position of saying, yes, but it's now a matter of the court saying that, no, you can't. But again, I've come back to a point I made earlier about the fact that they were able to introduce additional legislation over the post office scandal affair in respect of allowing people access to an easier method to get their convictions overturned. And there may well be a possibility there that the Treasury have now gone on record of saying it is a matter of public policy that this that people have access to the FCA, saying how can it be public policy and how can we have our rights enshrined in VISMA and then the court decide that but it doesn't actually mean that.
Understood, Ian. Thank you. So most definitely, please do liaise with your parliamentarian. You've made me think about the number of parliamentarians who co-signed the letter that Bob Blackman, the chair of the APPG, sent the Economic Secretary of the Treasury. Alexandra, you know the letter I'm talking about, the Bob to Bim letter, as we call it, with all the co-signatories on it. Could you put a link to it in the chat where people can go to it? The latest updated version with all the co-signatories in it, please?
Yes, no problem.
Thanks, Alexandra. Thank you very much. We're going to go back to Mr. Philip Meadowcroft, and then we'll, if you don't mind, Paul King, you've put a really interesting point in the chat. We'll see if Paul King would like to speak to what he just wrote in the chat. Mr. Meadowcroft, back to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Going back to what I was saying beforehand and the subsequent entries on the chat from Alex has made me think a bit more about this paragraph 110 in the judgment.
Okay.
Because it might be heretical of me to say it, I want to be very careful here, but are there grounds for beginning to think, reading section 110, that the judge might have accidentally misled himself?
Just purely hypothetically, if it were conceivable that the judge might have misled himself, what might point to that hypothetically? And that's, I know that's not what you're suggesting or stating, but hypothetically, what might lead somebody to think that might be the case?
It is the manner by which 110 is written, and Alex has interestingly added that what he has written there is precisely the words used by Lynx QC in the hearing.
Well, let's
Now,
see.
he's not disbarred from quoting what counsel has said,
Yeah.
but it seems to me that there is some kind of I'm discomforted by the way he has approached the matter, because it's all contained, I think, very essentially in that paragraph 110. But I leave it at that point. There are better brains than mine can see whether there's any mileage there.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you. Paul's in a car. He's not driving, by the way, but he's not going to be able to speak. Thank you, Paul, for letting us know that in the chat. Much appreciated. Let's go to anybody else that would like to come in with a comment. Please do. Wave a hand at me if you wish to say something. We will be wrapping up in just about 5 minutes or so. Let's go to Phil. Is that you again? You're welcome to come back in again if you want to. Is that a separate hand?
Sorry, Andy, was that to me, Ian?
Sorry, that I mishit a key on my keyboard.
Right.
Sorry.
No problem. I thought that might be the case. Back to you then, Mr. Ian Duffield. Thank you.
Yeah, again, just listening to what Philip said, I think one of the strong points, if I play devil's advocate here, that was made by counsel for Link is the fact that when this debate about the 77p in the pound and possible confusion was going on, she quite strongly and rightly, because that's her job, made the point that elsewhere in the document, it was very clearly explained by showing the table of exactly what people would get back. So on the basis that if anybody had read the document in entirety, which a big document like that is in itself, could be problematic for private investors. But the fact is, I think that did go a long way to satisfying the judge that it did clearly say you were going to get back between 5 and 9p in the pound, depending exactly where it ended up. And I think that is probably went to see, because the judge did ask for a little bit more clarification on that, so she got the opportunity to reiterate it a couple of times. And I think that was probably the big scoring point on what made the document reasonable for a reasonably intelligent person to look at. And so the 77p was, well, okay, it might not be very clear, but elsewhere it did clearly say, if you vote for this, you're going to get back between 5 and 9p in the pound.
Yeah.
You know? And that was that to me, when that was said, that I thought straight away, that's going to be a problem for us.
Okay, I get why you're putting such weight on that. I completely understand what you're saying then. Thanks, Ian. Thank you very much. But believe it or not, there's still a few more links to the documentary in the the commentary in the media about the 77p in the pound. Folks, please wave a hand at me if you want to come in. Otherwise, I'm going to talk about the Bob to Bim letter. I'll do that. Alexander's kindly put a link to it in the chat. We call it the Bob to Bim letter. I'm going to share my screen and just remind everybody that there was quite a bit of support in Parliament for the idea that perhaps there ought to be something done in Parliament about this. So the letter was dated on the 11th of December. But by the way, just in case you don't know, TTF provides a secretariat for this APPG. We do not speak on behalf of the APPG. We are just a secretariat. We just do the admin behind the scenes. But of course, I can point out matters of fact. And it is a matter of fact, on the 11th of December, Bob Blackman MP, who's the chair of the APPG, sent this letter to Bim Apolani. It basically says, "Dear Minister, we're very worried about what's happening with the Woodford situation. There's a court case. If it goes the wrong way, it could be awful for lots of people and for the UK economy. Here's our concerns," which I'm flying through now. You can read it yourself if you haven't read it before. And as you can see, we had some parliamentarians who wanted to be co-signatories to it. I'll scroll down quite quickly. This took a lot of work by the team, by the way. Alexander and Chelsea did a superb job on this, they really did. So what we will, of course, be doing is writing to each of these MPs, letting them know the outcome of the court decision and saying perhaps X, Y, Z should happen. I think I'm sure we'll do something along those lines. but it will be whatever the APPG decides to do. So quite a considerable bit of support there from all kinds of different politicians. And of course, I'm going to do this very quickly. Many of you also co-signed this letter. It's a real credit to you all that you were able to work collaboratively and so supportively in recent months. As I put in the chat in response to Paul King's note, I feel genuinely proud to be part of this team effort, this collective endeavour. We've got time for maybe one or perhaps two quick comments before we wrap up at 12 o'clock. Does anybody else want to come in with anything else? Mr. Graham Dickinson, thank you.
Hi, Andy, thanks. I just wanted to come back in very briefly on the 77% or pence in the pound thing. Somebody mentioned earlier, how can we check the figures? Well, my rough and ready calculations on that is, firstly, the proportion of the FCA's settlement figure. So the scheme, if we get the maximum 230 million against the assessment of 298 million, if you divide 230 into 298, it comes to 77.18%. So one of the 77 pence in the pound or percentages comes from that calculation. The other one that Ian was describing, I think earlier, was the return on the total return as a proportion of the fund closure value. Now, one or two people have pointed out in the comments, well, the fund closure value was quite low, and that doesn't really represent a starting point for our losses, and that's fair comment. But just to check the mathematics of that, if you take, I can't remember the exact figure of the total payouts, but it was something like 2.5 billion. And if you add 230 million to that, you get to about 2.73 billion. And if you take that as a proportion of the fund closure value, 3.56 billion, that comes to 76.9. So that's near enough 77%. Now, obviously, that 77% includes, for each individual investor, it includes everything you've already been paid back or to date. And we simply add to that the amount coming from the scheme. So the 77 pence in the pound might be an accurate statement of what you'll get back as a proportion of the closure price, but that's it. It doesn't mean anything else. And obviously, if you do a further bit of maths where you say, well, if we've been paid 250 million and we've got another 230 million to come, if you then split that that figure in those two proportions, that's where you get 6 or 7 pence in the pound, which is the reality of what the scheme represents when you do that calculation based on the fund closure value. So that's the simple maths of it, and it does check out. But both sides of it are misleading, because the one calculation assumes a given that the FCA's assessment is the correct one, which we don't agree with. The other calculation assumes as a given that the fund's closure figure represents the start point for assessing your losses. And of course, we don't agree with that either. But that's the mathematics of it. Those two different calculations of 77% hold up, but they're two completely different calculations.
Indeed. Thank you very, very much indeed. Thanks, Graham. We're going to go to Mr. Ian Carbarnes, and there's been some press activity already. I think Chelsea just kindly put a note in the chat, or a couple of them maybe. Thank you, Chelsea. Thank you very much. Keep doing that. We'll go to Ian Carbarnes. I'd like then to invite Alex Varley-Winter, if she'd like to, if she wants to elaborate on some of the observations you've also shared in the chat. Alex VW, feel free to chip in if you want to. Mr. Ian Carbarnes, nice to see you, Ian. Please share your thoughts. Thank you.
I just wanted to say very, very briefly a couple of things I put in the chat earlier. The judge placed a great deal of emphasis on the approval being based on the explanatory statement being thorough and complete and readable, but there's a couple of big issues with the explanatory statement. And first of all, it was not at all clear in the explanatory statement that people were losing the right to go to FOS and FSCS. So that was being, I think we should be emphasising that as being a big deficiency of what was in the explanatory statement. There was something else, but I've now forgotten what it was, but it's clearly missing from there, but you'll find it in the chat. I can't look at it again now, but I think that should be a part of our eventual appeal. And the other one is, I still really don't understand the ricochet effect and what the impact of that is on being able to go after people like Wim, because if that's a genuine ricochet, it would mean that Wim would have to defend themselves by saying Link should have stopped us doing this. Because unless they say that, then they don't have any reason to involve Link in their defence, and therefore claims against Wim should be valid at FSCS.
Ian, thank you very much indeed for your input. Much appreciated, both in the chat and also just now. Thank you, Ian. Alex Varley Winter, if you wish, please come in. Otherwise, we're probably going to bring the conversation to a close. Alex.
Yeah, I was just going to respond to what Philip said. As I'm not an investor, but I was in the court taking notes both days, and just what he noticed from the judgment is exactly what Link's barrister said. As to whether it's a point of challenge, I don't know, because I'm not a lawyer, but I would say maybe the key would be to direct the court to authorities on why that would be a wrong way to approach a scheme. That might be the way of challenging it, because plenty of people anecdotally gave evidence that certainly suggested to me that they were intelligent and still struggled to understand what they were going to get. So, I mean, anecdotally, I would find that convincing, but for a legal argument, perhaps you need authorities like previous cases, previous schemes, and how those were worked out. And the other point that came up in court, but not in court documents, was that the FCA, in defending themselves, said that they had investigations ongoing. And so I suppose the other outstanding question is, what's going to happen with those investigations? Is there anything further to come on the scandal, or was it simply that they were put on the spot in court and saying, well, we're doing plenty more, obviously, on this case? Like, was it a kind of line of defense, or is it something that they're actively pursuing? What does that mean for investors? All those questions.
Okay. Can I just come? Oh, am I on mute? Andy, just to mention, we must go back, in my view. FCA had the last words, and they said, we're only looking at Link for liquidity issues, nothing else, because it's not their responsibility, when it definitely is under the FCA rules and COP.
Okay. So thanks, Alan. Thank you very much, Alan. Thanks, Alex, for your input as well. Okay, we'll bring this particular meeting to a close. We'll be back at 3 o'clock. Between now and then, there might be another press statement going out. And I wonder if the FCA itself is going to be putting out a press statement today. I've had a quick look, Alex. I've not seen one from the FCA, but there might be later on. Thank you all very much indeed. We will continue to do the best we can. I should also mention that we are planning to run weekly Woodford campaign group meetings, Wednesdays at 5 o'clock. If one, the ongoing story is going to last for months, I think. So we'll put in the time, Wednesdays at 5 o'clock ongoing. But please feel free, if you wish, to come back today at 3 o'clock, the same link, and also at 6 o'clock. At 3 o'clock, we might be having somebody talking about, stressing the word might, talking about how the industry may need to respond to this, i.e. the rights that people thought they had under FOS and FSCS are not as rock solid as they once thought. Does the financial services sector need to make people aware of that? Thanks, folks. Thank you also. Very, very kind comments in the chat. Myself, Alexandra, Chelsea, the whole team, all the Woodford Warriors. It really has been a wonderful collective endeavour that we've all been part of. Thank you all. Have a good rest of your early afternoon, and maybe see you at 3 o'clock or 6. Cheers, guys. Thanks a lot. Thanks, ladies. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.